Good morning, everybody. Well, I'm from Seoul National University, and my topic today is about Jürgen Habermas and Gauching High. I will talk about 4 steps of theoretical reflection, innovation, to reach about the same conclusion. Well, I have known Professor Jürgen Habermas for a long time. I wrote my dissertation on Habermas and Michel Foucault in 1979, long time ago in the United States. And I have been keeping a good personal relationship with him. I met him last May in Munich, Germany. Today, I'd like to compare Habermas and Gauching High to reveal how they are similar. Well, you know Habermas, you know, of course, Gauching High, and I think it's very important to know how they are similar. And Professor Bin Chang just beside me, he wrote very interesting review about the activity by former student of Gauching High, which includes Liu Xiaojie, which sit below there. And this review was very interesting to me. And Bin Chang introduced the goal set by Gauching High in a very impressive, in a very systematic way. I was deeply, impressed by this great goal that they wanted to achieve. All right. And the first step they carried out is about reconstruction of Marxism. Reconstruction is not just revival. It's not just denial or rejection, but it's a kind of revision of Marxism. And both Habermas and Gauching High tried to revise Marxism in a very interesting way. So the first step I talked about is how they tried to reconstruct Marxism. And second step is both Habermas and Gauching High understand human emancipation and critique is fundamentally important. Particularly, they understand critique not just as a political activity, but as a theoretical or scientific activity. Then the question we raise is very simple: how we can prove truth of critical theory. All right. And the third step is about the social evolution. Habermas tries to revise historical materialism as a theory of social evolution, and evolution is understood as a kind of dialectical interplay between production on the one hand and communication on the other hand. In this sense, both Habermas and Gauching High, same conclusion, same perspective. That's my view. And how knowledge and social changes related together can be shown in this kind of diagram. It's very complicated dialectical interplay between the formation of knowledge on the one hand and the application of knowledge on the other hand. You can see that in my paper included in the proceeding. So, according to Habermas, the conclusion is the rational basis of social evolution can be confirmed in the function of learning, okay, as a key characteristic of human life. His study of social evolution supports the view that reflexive capacity of learning as a key to human civilization has increased in both dimensions of scientific, technical, and moral, practical learning. What about Gao Hai? You know, everybody knows that Gao Hai understands human evolution in terms of 3 stages. First is group-oriented stage, second is market-oriented stage, and the last stage is kind of later Faqian, later Zhonzhai. The first stage is the personal dependence of man upon authority. The second stage means individual independence, but material dependence prevails. Market relations. We can reach the really human potentiality only when we come to the stage of what I call anthropo-cosmic existence. So it involves a translation. I translate the later Zhonzhai as anthropo-cosmic existence, and the later Faqian anthropo-cosmic development, and Lei Xianghua becoming anthropo-cosmic actor, which means that he talks about not just anthropocentric development, but anthropo-cosmic development, which has something very important to do with Confucianism too. That is my understanding. So I showed how Gao Hai observed the consequences of globalization and individualization on the one hand, and also human reason, instrumental reason and its cost. By this instrumental reason, we were able to enjoy many material wealth, but at the same time, it creates lack of cost, sacrifice, byproduct, pathological, self-destructive consequences. And Gao Hai exactly mentioned that part in his writing. So that is very much similar to what I see from Habermas. All right. So Gao's conclusion, I think, is about open communication. Individuals can attain a sovereign subjectivity only when they internalize anthropo-cosmic conditions of a human being. For this, the communicative barriers must be demolished, and a universal relationship of communication must be established. Seen in this way, a monadic development cannot mitigate the dependent relation itself, but in contrast, deepen the dependency among men into a new form of material dependence. So he welcomed market economy, globalization on the one hand, but also he's highly critical of the material dependence of man on some kind of capitalist condition. The fourth step I'm talking, I think this is most important in my presentation. The turn. In the Habermas case, he turned toward discourse theory. His idea of critique is based upon his conception of discursive testing. So I introduced this idea, why Habermas turned critical theory toward language, communication, or exactly discursive testing. That is probably the most important thing for him. And here we see the dimensions of discursive testing, which involves 2 types. One is theoretical, empirical type, or practical type. And also 2 dimensions, analytic dimension and the reflexive dimension. So according to him, discursive testing is carried out at these 4 different levels according to certain rules in communication. So he tried to explicate what these conditions are. So let me see. Discursive testing is oriented toward participatory democracy. So discursive testing is oriented toward the democratization of everyday life. Discursive testing suggests that practical problem, not only technical problem, practical problem can also be resolved rationally. Individuals can take part in the transformation of the social organization to which they belong. discursive testing support participatory democracy. Now, what about Kaohsiung High? It is my most important part of my presentation today. I think Kaohsiung High turned toward Confucianism in order to enrich his idea of later Zhongjai. But Kaohsiung High never talked it very precisely. Kaohsiung High talked about the Chinese philosophy to gain the national identity, national soul, national ego. That part we can easily understand. But he goes further because he thinks that his idea of later Zhongjai has something to do with the normative vision offered by Confucianism, like the unity between heaven and earth. There are many very interesting normative visions of Confucianism. I think is very closely related to Kaohsiung High. So why turn to Confucianism? Well, while we are running towards the goal of modernization, this is Kaohsiung High statement, we face the risk of losing our tradition and our identity. If we fail to cultivate the national ego, we will likely succumb to Western way of thinking. Then we will lose our cultural tradition, even though we may enjoy a material life. As our national identity disappears, China will likely become not Chinese, and Chinese people will also likely become not Chinese. So he wanted to preserve Confucianism in his theory, but I feel that he didn't go further. So in order to go further, we need a particular method, which I call symptomatic reading. And by this symptomatic reading, I feel that we can detect how deeply Kaohsiung High is also Confucian, in addition to being a very wonderful Marxist scholar, in my view. Okay. So, therefore, my interpretation is very cautiously. Kaohsiung High somehow, even though he didn't talk it very explicitly, but he turned himself to Confucianism to see the close relationship between his idea of later Zhongjai and normative vision provided by Confucianism. That is, I think, his work. Yeah. So, concluding remark. Habermas and Gao converged into a common framework of critical theory. Second, Habermas and Gao shared the view that social evolution is characterized by the increase of the reflexive capacity of learning as a key to human civilization. Habermas compared Greek philosophy and Asian tradition, including Confucianism and Taoism and Buddhism, in his 2019 book, Eine Geschichte der Philosophie. So, what I'm doing is very simple. I'm very interested in introducing Kaohsiung High to global academic community by carrying out some imaginative research. That's why I am here. I want to continue this kind of research because I am convinced that Habermas and Kaohsiung High share the view that, among other things, communication, open and free communication is a very important condition for man to become an anthropocosmic existence. Thank you very much.